Welcome to Book Rising, a podcast by the Radical Books Collective. Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in. My name is Bhakti Shringarpure and I am the co-founder and the creative director of the Radical Books Collective, and I had the pleasure of chatting with my friend and the dynamic founder of Brittle Paper, Ainehi Edoro, and we talked about the Booker Prize, its power, its prestige, its significance, the ways in which it shapes the literary canon, and then we talked quite in detail about the 6 nominated books. This event took place on Instagram Live, but here is the audio recording. Thank you. So, Ainehi, I think this is unique for us, even though you and I have both done all kinds of conferences and events and things like that together. But in a way, we are trying to perform a chat, discussion. and just like the Booker likes to keep the suspense, we have kept our own opinions on this suspenseful. So I'm going to be surprised at every turn, at everything you say.
Okay.
I thought it's now past 1, so I thought I could start with a few kind of fun facts about the Booker, and then you tell me what you think is interesting about the award, and then we just kind of can build from there.
Okay, good. Just a quick shout out to Leila Bulela. Hi, love.
Is she here?
Yes, she's right there. Okay, go on.
Yeah. Well, first, also a quick shout out to Boubacar Baris Diop, who won the Neustad International Prize.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And he, as you know, I've translated one of his novels and many of his essays and things like that. So it feels wonderful. And I think it's just been a great year for African literature. You have David Diop, who won the Booker for the translation.
Right.
We have Abdul Razak Gurna. Amazing. Now we have Boris Diop, and then if Nadifa wins, or I guess Damon Gal.
Or Gal Gadot wins. It's going to be this explosive year for African literature. So Booker Prize judges, you're listening,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so the Booker Prize is 52 years old. It's like at a very good established middle age.
Yeah.
It's still only half as old as the Nobel. But it's super different, of course, from other prizes. And I think whatever I've read about it, it seems that it's not only committed to kind of excellence, literary excellence, but is also right from the beginning invested in selling more books.
Right.
And so that's why you have these kind of first they announce the jury. In fact, they sometimes announce the jury like a year in advance. Then you have the long list, then you have the short list. You have tons of press. It's also the prize that people bet on the most. I've never betted on a prize, but this is something that's out there. It's happening. And also they do a lot of get their authors written about a lot, and then they do run-up videos, little montages, readings. The ceremony itself is very much hyped and things like that. So I think that's one super interesting thing about the Booker and unique thing. And then the second thing I would say that's interesting about the Booker that no other prize really does is that it's constantly in a state of renewal and mutation.
Right.
You had the translation prize that started. You have the Booker of Bookers. Salman Rushdie got it. You had the International Booker, which Chinua Achebe got. You have the Golden Man Booker, which is like the 10-year. I don't know. They have constantly all these things. And because they keep renewing themselves, they also end up with these scandals, which I think are delicious and tasty and fun and exciting. Yeah. But the 2 scandals of note, of course, is that in 1991, the Orange Prize for Fiction, or now called the Women's Prize for Fiction, were so ticked off at the Booker
that they started, because they refused to let any women win. So they started the Women's Prize in fiction. And then 2013 was the big scandal because they allowed American
to come in.
To come in. And it was very controversial because it was a very UK prize. I would say it's a very post-colonial, like empire prize. We can talk about that later. So anyway, I think that was interesting. And I think people said, oh, you know, now with the US, it's going to be all American and US heavy. It hasn't been like that. It'll be, you know, and instead of focusing on international writers and Commonwealth countries, Anglophone Commonwealth countries, all the Americans will just sweep it. But I think the truth is that it just strengthened like New York publishing and London publishing.
Right. Yeah. It actually made the book much more powerful because now it has this global riches of like the two publishing headquarters of the world, right? The US and the UK. And also, I mean, it's important to also think about the ways in which the Booker itself is driven by market forces, and you already mentioned that earlier, but that it is a prize that is for the industry, for the market, by the industry, by the market, right? In the sense that it is different from prizes like the Nobel, right, which is kind of writer focused, writer centric, or the Wyndham Campbell Prize, right, which is very writer-centric, writer-focused. The Booker Prize is the industry sort of creating this engine to drive book sales. On Facebook the other day, what's her name? Bernardine Evaristo shared a plaque, right, where she had sold 1 million copies of her book, right? Do the math, right, on how much one book costs. How much it means to sell 1 million copies. And this is after she won the Booker, right? And that is just in the UK market by itself, right? So this is a prize that gets money into the pockets of writers, publishers, booksellers, everybody in the industry. And in a sense, you know, that of course separates it from these other prizes, but it tells us that we are dealing with a machinery, that the $50,000 that the author goes back home with is just like a tiny little iceberg of this massive industry, that is this massive prize that is designed to move units of books in the millions.
I mean, that's a really important point, and that's the reason we want, of course, certain writers to get it, you know, because we want that place for those writers. We want that you know, we want that avenue open for them. We want books to sell, but it's also, I guess it always also comes down to are the books that Booker, you know, holds up, have they historically been diverse? Have they historically been challenging some standards of literary Anglophone writing, you know? Those are questions too, I guess. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think that the prize definitely has literary credibility, right?
Yeah.
It does.
It does.
Even though it plays to a kind of popular sentiment, you know, like you mentioned, it's performative, showy, you know, kind of demeanor, right? It wants to put up a performance to people, for people, whether in terms of scandals or in terms of, you know, just putting on a show, right? From the moment the long list is announced to the very end that the winner is announced. And so it's really this prize that straddles the literary world, the world of the average reader, and the market, and brings everybody together in a way that enlivens the industry economically, you know? And that's, so we have to ask, yes, there's literary credibility, but what drives that credibility? And for me, it's the money. You know?
How is it? Yeah, I know. But, you know, I think you said that it's like the part of the books they want to sell have to be readable books. but it is
right.
You know, they have to be readable, they have to be accessible, but they do have a history also of rewarding experiment, right?
Yes.
I mean, how many people actually finished reading Midnight's Children? How many people finished reading Marlon James's History of Seven Killings? Okay, we have to be real about this. And I think I would say that they do have a very particular approach they have towards literary excellence. I think all the nominees, the 6 that we will discuss in a bit, are all count as high literature. You know, if you want to talk about that. I know that there are others that, you know, you can debate more. You know, Margaret Atwood, you know, does work within genre and things like that. But I think they have some interest in being having literary excellence, and I think in the past they've had scandals where they're like, is the Booker Prize dumbing itself down, and they don't like that. And to me that's kind of interesting, because I think as someone who you know, is teaching in an English department, or you know, has been forced into the kind of history of the English literature, the Booker really imitates those kind of dynamics of stuffy kind of empire concerns, you know, even though they seem more diverse, say, than the Nobel and so on. It appears that they actually, the record is not that great, you know. I mean, of course they always have the nominees also benefit from the hype. It's not just the winner, but their diversity record, you know, they have Naipaul, they have Kiran Desai, Arundhati Roy, Ishiguro, Ben Okri. Yeah, but in general, it's not that many at the end of the day. But they do have this, what Peter Carey, the Australian writer, says, there is some feeling of like the leftovers of empire, you know, coming through. And I thought that was actually pretty interesting. And I think the sort of standards we expect, the kind of literature we teach, is determined by the Booker, but Booker is determined also by those exact standards. There's some shifting, moving relationship between those things.
It's interesting that you put it in those terms. I like the idea that there's a kind of symbiotic relationship between literature within the academic context and the Booker Prize. I mean, partly maybe because both systems imagine themselves in this kind of glorious way, you know, that they are the arbiters of you know, of what counts as great, amazing fiction. But it's also important to return to the money, right? Because I remember reading, what's this novel, Bridget Jones' Diary. One interesting fact about Bridget Jones is that after Ben Okri won the Booker, she bought Ben Okri's The Famished Road. But Bridget Jones could never finish it. And it was part of one of a source of anxiety for her, in addition to her weight and everything. She'd be like, you know, today must read The Famished Road. But she just could never read the book. She could never finish it, which, I mean, speaks to your comment that, look, there are times when these choices are experimental and they're weird, right? But that didn't prevent Bridget Jones from buying it. Right? Yeah. She bought a copy, like all the millions of people who will buy copies just because the Booker says you should buy it, right? So is this kind of interesting mix between, yes, I'm the arbiter of what is great and amazing and cool in literary fiction, but the magical effect of the moment I say that it's this book, there's a whole market effect that comes from that. So that, I mean, does it really, I mean, what's the real impact of the fact that they sometimes choose experimental books, right? When the point of it is that it should kind of energize the industry. I don't know.
You know, to compound that point, to push it even further, apparently last year, W.H. Smith, which is a bookseller chain in the UK, is somehow part of the award, or they sponsor it or something. And then the debates were, is readability going to be privileged?
Right.
So once, so this is the year to weigh in, I guess, even more so on readability. I think last year's list was fairly dense. Maza Mengiste's writing pretty dense. Sitsi Dangaremba, not for the lightweights, Shugi Bain, also not for the lightweights.
Also not for the light, but also sweet and devastating in certain kinds of ways. And so maybe that's actually could be one of the things that we come to when we are assessing the books for this year, like who is likely to win, how readable, how experimental are these books,
Yeah. Should we talk about the jury? Because I think I just am so surprised at the jury. Every year it's
what surprises you about this year's jury?
Look, they've all written, okay, they all have some writing experience, but there's a pretty famous actress, the woman from Californication, who plays the partner of David Duchovny.
What's her name? Actually, do you have your notes there? Can you tell us who the judges are? I know two people.
I may not have it, but I have my computer here. So it's basically, the chair is Maya Jasanoff, who's the academic at Harvard, and she's a historian. So of course it makes us think, the historical novel will be under scrutiny. There is an archbishop.
Okay.
Hey. Why not? So then I'm thinking Richard Powers' bewilderment and this kind of majestic relationship, godlike relationship with nature. Then of course you have Chigozie
Obioma, who is an interesting writer in terms of his relationship to style and language, right? He I wouldn't call him a purist, but he sort of inhabits this very intentional relationship to language and style as being something that has to be precise and sculpted.
What's a purist? What's a purist? I'm seeing this word. I don't know how one is using this word.
No, just I'm not saying that he's a purist in terms of language and style, but that he has a certain type of elevated value for style and language as something that needs to be sculpted and clean and perfectly done. That kind of approach to writing, as in his writing, I don't think of as messy, and even in the way he talks about writing, messiness is not what I will describe to him.
Right. Okay, I see exactly what you're saying. Horatia, and I'm forgetting her last name, is an editor-writer for, I think, the Financial Times, writes a lot about literature. And that might be it. I think there's 4 or 5 of them. That might be it. I wanted to look at them more, and then I ended up thinking more about the writers and less about the judges. But I think what is surprising to me about the way the jury is picked is the diversity of age and professions. So they all are invested in reading and writing. They may have books that are published. So Natasha McElhone, I think is her name. I think she has a book about loss, because she lost her husband and then ended up writing this very moving book. So everyone is writing and reading, but to me, it comes back to the question of readability and literary excellence, and I don't think the two should be at odds with each other at all. But it's like, the idea is that this book should be available to many professions, many ages. All these people should be able to access it.
Right.
You see?
Right. Because it's a book that should be legible to as many people as possible, even as it holds on to its status as literary fiction. Right. Yeah. So how can you pull those things together? The Cain Prize does that as well, where you have a diverse body of judges who are coming from different disciplines, different spaces. And it's a matter of what kind of magic can happen when you have these people who love books, yet invested in books, but in such different ways. And so how can they agree on what counts as literary, but also readable on some level as well?
Yeah.
Book that should be legible to as many people as possible, even as it holds on to its status as literary fiction, right? So how can you pull those things together? The Cain Prize does that as well, where you have a diverse body of judges who are coming from different disciplines, different spaces. And it's a matter of what kind of magic can happen when you have these people who love books, they are invested in books, but in such different ways. And so how can they agree on what counts as literary, but also readable on some level as well?
Yeah. And I think the Booker has come around to this, because I was looking at historically their judges, and they used to be like lit professors, emeritus, whatever, you know, like the people in the Tweed, in the UK making the decisions, and some people like that I read as an undergrad in India, like David Deiches, and people who write about literary criticism. So I think they are very invested in being hip. They have become very hip, and they
are very invested in being hip. And I know that they've also been strongly encouraged, let me put it that way, strongly encouraged to revamp their social media visibility. That's huge for them. Brand wise, social media has been like this thing that they've really gone at aggressively. Of course, the pandemic contributed to that, in the sense that prizes had to scramble and figure out a way to perform, what they do without being able to meet in person, right? So everyone had to leverage social media in some way. But in addition to that, the Booker Prize has put a ton of money, a ton of expertise into making itself legible on social media and connecting with readers, especially Instagram, where all the book lovers are.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you can see it, from the ways that from the announcement of the judges to the winner, all through last year, you saw how they curated very, very well done content around the prize.
Yeah. Before we go to the actual books, I guess let's think, what are our biggest issues with this particular prize? We accept its significance. I accept its extraordinary power. There is no doubt, right? But what are some of what critique? I mean, what critique can we say? Even like the money you're saying is not necessarily critique, right? We want that book to sell.
We want the industry to thrive, and that seems to be one of the ways in which it infuses some lifeblood into itself.
Yeah.
So when we say that, maybe it doesn't sound like we are necessarily critiquing that. No. I mean, where would a critique come in? I would say that Bernardine has talked a lot about the diversity issues with the industry as a whole, which is kind of more powerfully exemplified in prizes like that, right? I mean, to think that she is the first Black woman, right, to get the prize is egregious. I think so.
She is.
Yes, she is, right? Is egregious. And I mean, I don't know how the whole sharing the prize with Atwood happened, right? I know, I can imagine it was a process of a very complex and torturous process in the decision room. But even at that, right, it was her sharing the prize with another author, right? Yeah. So, and it's not as if that takes away from her winning it and the impact of that on her, but it just tells you that we had to wait that long, says that there is something deeply wrong about the ways that the industry is failing to be diverse. So that aspect to me will be one way to think of,
Sure. I mean, I can.
The prize.
I think I would build on that to say that the industry is deliberately resistant. It's to me, the publishing industry, London and New York, if you think of them as like Anglophone, whatever, right, centers of like generating literary things, is you know, they are the last bastion in a way of a kind of wasp white gentleman industry, you know.
Yeah.
So that's definitely, that's for sure. I think one of my biggest issues with the Booker is, of course, that they cannot engage smaller presses, independent presses, or anybody on the global south. So they have these creds because of their history, because of the history of British Empire. They have this credibility that they actually are diverse, or that people from the global south are getting this award, but they can't get it unless they are published in the UK.
Right.
Or Ireland.
Right.
And this is the crazy part. Like, so Sitsi Dangaremba's Nervous Conditions, perfect. Booker of the Bookers, I would call it, but no way, right? Because it was published on the African continent. And so then the Mournable Body comes and gets surprised because it's it has a UK push. So I think that is one of the most disconcerting things, because then it gives a very wrong idea of like the extensive publishing networks and the amazing work coming out of the global south. You know, whether it's South Asia, whether it's the African continent, or wherever they're speaking English, right? So I think that's one of the biggest issues at the end of the
back to you, absolutely right. I mean, think about Karen Jennings' book, right?
Yes,
it was published in South Africa and then published in the UK. If it were just the South African publisher, I doubt that it would have been able to get into the Booker. So what this means, though, is that of the tens of millions of dollars that will accrue to the winning book, right?
Yeah.
None of that is originating or coming from the global south.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're just having this industry that is essentially designed to make money for publishers in the West. So
or
that
the big five, as we say in the US, or the big four.
Right. Yeah. Because it's not just about book sales, it's about translation rights and publication rights, right? So imagine an indie publisher in Lagos has their book on the Booker long list. Just imagine how that electrifies, energizes the local publishing industry. But systemically, all these spaces are cut off from that flow of capital through books. And you're right, you know, that itself is troubling in a kind of systemic way.
Yeah, and I think it might be controversial for me to say that, because of course I have children who are exactly that identity, but I don't think diversity is always diasporic diversity, you know, like it has to be international.
Right,
too.
right, exactly.
Like, so
right, because even if the diversity is diasporic, right?
Yeah.
In terms of infrastructures of capital, it's still in the West. Their scheme might be different, right? But it's still benefiting publishers and booksellers in the West, as opposed to kind of a much more interesting diversity where it shifts, you know, the vector of the way that money is flowing. If an African publisher actually gets into this mix, it has much more structural impact, you know?
Totally. Who would you, so within the framework of the Booker, were there upsets, people you thought would be on the list and weren't? I'm trying to think if I had.
I'm trying to think. I would say.
So what are your? Should we talk about those 6 books?
I say we talk about the book because we have about.
We have some time.
Yeah. No. Yeah. We have about. We don't have that much time actually.
Okay.
So let's talk about the book. I feel like that's the cocoa of this conversation.
Yeah. All right. Let's go. Who do you want to start with?
I will say let's start with the most sort of the strangest of all. The strangest book Why are you looking at me with that face?
I
You know what
I'm
book
trying
it
to
is.
think which is you think is the strangest.
Oh no, this is strange.
I'm guessing it's this one.
Yes, it's the strangest on all levels.
So this is Patricia Lockwood. No One Is Talking About This is the name of her book.
This book. Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, tell us what it's about and tell us your thoughts.
I enjoyed it.
Okay, go on.
I think, so she's a poet apparently, and I've never read her or heard of her. But there were some moments in the beginning which was sort of laughing out loud, you know, because she's talking about social media and talking about viral tweets, and she's writing in that form. And it goes very, very fast. On one level, it challenges the reader because it's not a linear narrative. On another level, it's just very easy to keep going. Sometimes you're laughing, sometimes you're shocked. It's very much a post-Trump era book.
Right.
Upset about what is she? I think she calls him the dictator or something like that.
Yes.
And then it's really about abortion and child, you know, having this child and her family and all this kind of stuff. So it gets very serious suddenly, but I like the humor. I think I divided the books into humorless and humorful. And I think even though hers is like tragic comic and very intense sometimes and very self-deprecating, and it's like social media, you know, you feel a bit embarrassed.
Yes.
You know,
it is social media.
It was good.
It is social media in a sense. It's like imagine a cross between tweets and Facebook posts, right? So the plot is not linear, and I will show you guys at home. You see, it's like fragments, right?
Yeah.
She said she
wrote it on a phone. She said she wrote everything on a phone.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense in the sense that it reads like you're reading.
She's lying. Come on.
What did you say?
That can't be true that she wrote it all on the phone.
Oh, that's very possible. There are people who can generate a ton of content. My students can, like, they can write anything on their phone, right? So it's this character who went viral on social media because she asked this question: can a dog be twins? And it went viral, and so she became a kind of social media star, and she would travel all over the world giving talks about of just things that she writes, comments, questions, right? That she writes. And Bhakti is right that it can be exciting. It can also just be exhausting. Let me be honest. Because, you know, it's like you're just going from one fragment to another that is trying really hard to be epiphanic, you know, to have this thing. It's saying there is humor, definitely. And it was exhausting for me at the beginning, because after you've read like 20 pages, you're like, okay, all right, I get it, disjointed commentaries. But then when I learned to read a little, put it aside, come back to it, read a little, put it aside, actually enjoy it more, you know. So I would say I'm
gonna salvage it very quickly, because on page 23 there is this very, very funny one, and I laughed and laughed. And you know what my impulse was? Let me take a photo and to send it out into the internet. Our mothers could not stop using horny emojis. They used the winking one with its tongue out on our birthdays. They sent us long rolls of the spurting 3 droplets when it rained. And then she says, never send me the eggplant again, Mom. I don't care what you're cooking for dinner. I think it's brilliant. Anyway, it's not always that funny, of course. It can be very repetitive, and it's just very American in the end, and that's not that exciting, you know?
Yeah. But yeah, it's very experimental, and it's inspired by social media as a form. So for people who are studying what social media does to the way we tell stories or the way we shape ideas, what it means to think like social media, this book is pretty brilliant for that kind of formal translation of social media. Let's do Shipstead.
Oh, I loved it.
Okay. So Shipstead's book, Maggie Shipstead's
980 pages, people.
Yes,
your loins.
It is titled The Great Circle, and it tells the story of two women, interconnected lives. One is set in the turn of the 20th century, and she's kind of modeled according to Amelia Earhart, right? Is that her name? The woman who made history.
Aviator, Marianne Graves.
Yes. No, I don't think Maggie Graves is historical.
No, it's a fictional.
Right, yeah. So Maggie Graves is fictional, but she's sort of modeled according to that aviator, boundary pushing, glass ceiling breaking figure. And then the story goes between her story in the turn of the 20th century and the turn of the 21st century in 2014, when a Hollywood actress is in the middle of adapting Maggie Graves' story in a movie. So it's two women's lives going back and forth. It's massive. It's the one book that I did not finish. I haven't finished it. But it's also the book that I read curled up in my reading chair with a blanket and just got lost in it. So if you're thinking a kind of old school, immersive, gripping storytelling, you know, I think of Eleanor Caton's The Luminaries or Donatat's Goldfinch. These like massive tomes, but are just deliciously gripping and drama, filled with drama. I think this is the book. I loved it.
I'm completely with you on that. It's completely gripping, and even though I wouldn't say that it's just kind of basic storytelling, like pop storytelling, I think it plays a lot with form within it.
Yes.
And I think it tries to do quite a lot with perspective and characters, and also at the level of a sentence. I think it's formally, it's quite intensely there. And I love the LA character who
I did too. You know, yes, I
like
did.
This lost tween who became a star as a tween, and then has now grown up to be this jaded young woman who finds life through this by being asked to play this movie. It also reminded me of my favorite movie of all time, which is an adaptation called The French Lieutenant's Woman. And the screenplay of the book was adapted by Harold Pinter, and Meryl Streep is in it, and I think Daniel Day-Lewis. And you know, in that you have this couple having this affair on set, and they're actors, and they are bringing into adapting the novel. So it creates all these kind of cool layers. Anyway, it was very good, and I think she is a kind of non-binary type character or a masculine character. It's a new kind of way to think about the 50s, you know, what these people were doing. I don't think it's new. I think we have a lot of that. But I think it's a nice, soft, sweet intervention. I can't find any big trouble with it.
Yes. No, I can't. I think it's beautifully done.
Yeah,
like,
and we
well
know that
executed.
The booker likes the page length, man.
They
like
do.
The fat ones.
The fat ones. Okay.
They do. Maureen James, Shuggie Bain, I'm trying to think.
Eleanor Caton's The Luminary is 900 pages.
Oh, that's right.
Or 700 or something crazy like that. Okay. You pick the next book.
I'm not picking it, but I know you're into it.
Okay.
Richard Powers' Bewilderment.
Okay.
At Ainehi's campus, set on Ainehi's campus, sort of.
No, it's not sort of. It is set at University of Wisconsin-Madison. It is set on my campus. Let me just make that clear.
Yes. No, I'm just talking about when they go off into the woods all the time. It's not always on campus.
Right. They go into the Smoky Mountains, right? Yeah.
Yeah. A father and son, and the child who's neuroatypical. And to me, the main redeeming feature of the novel is not, as everyone is saying, it's a climate change parable, climate change, great about all that. But I think it's a really sensitive disability novel. And I think those get ignored. And I think the portrait of the child is lovely, wanting to combat the child's diagnosis of ADHD, autism, this and that. And the doctor's asking to medicate him, and the father in resistance. I thought that was kind of I thought that was I thought it was powerful, and a powerful indictment also of the U.S. Sort of psychology machine here.
Right.
That we have mental health machinery. I mean, it's great we have it here, but it's also kind of has its problems, right? Because they overprescribe, and especially children. So I thought that was thing. I think the writing is absolutely stellar, if not a bit, I would say, overwritten.
Okay, I have to tell you, it feels too clean. I felt it was a kind of work that has been put through a certain kind of editing machinery. It's like it's just cut to perfection, you know? And it's also easy to read. It's delectable. It feels like dessert almost. I think so. I feel like, you know, I powered through the pages. And also it does this fascinating thing with storytelling, right? So the main character is an astrobiologist, and his research is that he runs simulations on finding possible places in the galaxy where there are planets that show signs of life, right? But at night, he would tell his son stories about planets that they make up, you know? Mm-hmm. And it's just fascinating to get into this storytelling modes about galactical spaces, you know? So that gives it a certain type of speculative fiction feel, I thought. Yeah. And I like what he does with scale, where, you know, it goes between his world with his son and then galaxies and billions of stars and things like that. My only issue with the book is that it felt very familiar in a certain kind of American literary tradition of white men who go off into the woods when the world is falling apart. So that even though, as you mentioned, it's about climate change, it's still about like him and his world and his hang-ups, his issue, right? It just felt as if climate change and like the Trumpian dystopia is something in the background. But, you know, he can go off into the Smoky Mountains, or, you know, at the very end, he could kind of fold up into his own self. I don't know. That's felt a bit.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is that these books are angry liberals, angry white American liberals. Patricia Lockwood is like that, and certainly Richard Powers. They're very angry about Trump and this, that, and the other. But it is, I don't think, like, they don't have like political weight in their works for some reason, which I see, which I want. You know, at the end of the day, those themes are always individualism. They're not about the system. You know what I mean?
It's about
so that's very American.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, so at the end of the day, that individualism is very applauded in the United States. I mean, this is the country of like 1 trillion memoirs coming out day in, day out. I mean, you think about the Iowa MFA Writers Workshop and all those kinds of things. There is this kind of self-satisfied individualist focus in the writing that's constantly applauded, the coming of age and things like that, as opposed to the grand political novels of injustice and you know, systemic brutalities or something like that. So yes, so they succeed, but yeah, there's something very American about them. I agree
about that way of thinking about big systemic questions like global warming and
I would like to rescue Maggie Shipstead though from that. I do think that she's doing more somehow. I don't know why that is.
Of course, I know why that is. It's feminism. It's feminism. Yeah, is that she's coming from a tradition that knows how to kind of, you know, of root the personal into the political in ways that feels hefty, right? As opposed to reducing large questions about how the world works to ideals of, you know, my own interior state or things like that.
No, absolutely, it's very much so. And here are the foreigners.
Yes.
The others.
I did well. We went through the Americans.
Yes, so the Americans are out of the way now, and I hope they will be out of our way
Okay, now we can talk about these folks. Okay.
Which one do you want to start with? I did not finish the Sri Lankan novel, even though I would say that Sri Lankan writing is in English is one of my more favorite things. And it was something that for a while I was even thinking like, should I only focus on Sri Lankan writing? I think it's heavy and plodding. I think it's...
plodding?
Yeah, I think it doesn't move. It's very like, it's a hammer, he's hammering, the existential question of loss and war and political trauma.
History and violence.
Yeah. And this is in the humorless category to me.
Yes. Yes, it is. It is in a sense, although there's a kind of absurd
existential absurdity.
Right. I would say it's leaning more towards the absurd, right? Because what happens, he gets this random call from the sister of the woman who takes care of his wife, and the woman had died. She fell into a well. And so he's thinking, did she jump into the well? Did somebody push her into the well? Did she accidentally fall into the well? But then that sort of ignites or sends him on this journey from Colombo to the north, where there had just been a civil war. And I think his first novel is actually about the civil war itself. And then this is about the aftermath of that war. I like the way the book starts. I am a sucker for the openings of novel. I think it's a beautiful ritual, how a novel kind of opens itself to you. Sure. And I never read blurbs before I read novels. And this is very strange. When you enter into the book, he has this beautiful reflection on time. And so you're wondering, okay, where is he? What's the punchline here? His writing is very beautiful. So you stay with it, even though you are like, well, where is this going? And then he hits the point where he says, okay, well, I got this phone call that totally shattered my day. And then the story goes on. But yes, you're right. It's really his reflection on all kinds of things as he goes on this journey. And so in that way, it reminds me a lot of Tedrick Cole's Open City. Another, story about a man who just thinks that they have all these, they are so brilliant that we can spend an entire book listening to what they are thinking about all kinds of things.
Hyper-intellectualizing. And while I think I loved Open City for whatever it's worth, for whatever the controversies. I also do love like Proustian prose. I'm not a fan of like the Knausgaard, who they say is the new Proust, because he has these volumes and volumes on just like daily life. I think at the end of the day, Anuk Aruda Pragasam, I think the attempt is there to create a kind of heavy existential philosophical novel, and I support the gesture, but I don't think it fully lands. It's like it's very intense. It doesn't want to have paragraphs, for example. It's allergic to paragraphs. It wants to create a claustrophobic environment, and you have to give into it. And I'm willing to give into it, but I think it doesn't fully land. It didn't fully land for me, and that was personally I felt a bit sad, because I do think that the Sri Lankan tradition in Anglophone novel is very rich and
written. For a story that is not heavy on plot, it gets you, it hooks you, because he just has this way of processing and thinking through his universe that I found immersive and lovely. So Galgut. Okay.
I think it's excellent writing out of all of them.
Seriously?
Yes,
okay. All right. Let me hear you out. Go on.
It's dry. It's crisp. A lot of narrative experimentation, which makes you smile, makes you surprised. He's playing a lot of tricks with the reader, and I think the idea of the deaths and like the different deaths in this family, and then the idea that each moment is different within South African political history is interesting. You know, it compresses the sort of loss, mourning characters, etc., quite well. Yes, is it a white Africans man centering white Africans problem? Oh no, why am I so racist? Poor me, help me. And why, you know, so the characters are like working through their issues, you know, and it's unfortunate because we have seen that. We know the master of that fiction is Coetzee, and you know, these Afrikaans writer, and I do think Damon Galgut has a strong chance of winning. And it's unfortunate, but this is the kind of South African prose that constantly is demanded, published, amplified.
Yeah.
So the themes I'm not into, but the writing, yes.
So I had issues with the book. I'm just going to be honest. I think to start with, let me just tell you what it's about. It's actually a very fascinating premise. A woman is dying and she asks her husband to promise to give their black maid her house and the plot of land where it's on. Okay? She's not asking him to give her their family house. It's the little plot that the black maid occupies with her family. And the man tells his wife, I will do that. So that's what the promise is. The only witness to this promise after the woman dies is the 13-year-old girl called Amor. So she, out of this kind of just really, I don't know, sensitive soul, she insists that the family holds themselves to that promise. But as the year goes by, they refuse to. And there are a series of tragedies that happen to the family. So it's almost as if they are cursed because they refuse to give the black maid that house. All of that is well and good. And is this really searing exploration of racism in South Africa over time from the end of apartheid up until Mbeki, right? And so Bhakti is right that it's powerful in those ways. My issue is the reductive representation of black people in this book. Okay, and I don't know, as a black person, it was hard to read their representation of Salome, the black maid, is that she never once commands any perspective. She's always been described, you know, my favorite is her inscrutable back. You know, in this kind of very bodily centered description where she's just like a wallpaper, you know, and I find that problematic. I think that if you're going to dissect white racism, you cannot do it at the cost of reducing the black lives in that story. When you do that, you're essentially reproducing the very structure that you're trying to critique. The best way to critique racism is to make sure that you humanize black people within storytelling. So Galgut, to me, missed a huge opportunity by not allowing Salome to actually tell her story or allowing her to take up space in the book in a way that is human. I would say that's the huge issue I have with the book. Everything that Bhakti said about the writing and everything, yes, I agree.
Yeah. Hey, Esther Irma from Ghana is waving at us. Hey, no, I agree with you. But I think the only thing I would add, which is so cynical, is that it's invested in that insular Afrikaans thing, you know. And it's also the Coetzee problem, you know. I have had the privilege to spend 8 days with Coetzee in Palestine. At the Palestine Festival of Literature, and it is this opacity and the not committing to a particular politics, you know, on some level that creates this kind of master writer. And it's, of course, it's a very masculine approach too. Damon Galgut is a gay man. You know, I think the writing is brilliant, but it's also within the tradition of this white South African thing. So I feel all the things you're saying are absolutely true, but they're never going to take that edit. You know what I mean?
Right,
That's
right.
never going to be, because what drives this writing is that, oh no, poor me, I can't represent the Black character.
Right.
Because, you know, look at the historical alienation we have experienced. Oh, I have no room to think it. I can only be in existential woe. I wish I wasn't racist. You know,
Yeah.
so there's something like that. But let's get to the one.
Yes.
I want her to win, obviously, and for personal reasons. I know her. I love her work. I've always taught her work, and of course, because it's so urgent, I would put it in the humorless category. Okay, it's very heavy. Not in a bad way, but it has some kind of one note element that also a Rook's novel has. But of course, it's you know, it's like, here's a novel offering a corrective on a systemic injustice, a man that was hanged wrongly in Wales. So yeah, so I think, of course, I want this one to win. I do think that if she wins, it is going to be an underdog win, because I don't know what happened, but her book is not out in the US.
It's coming out next year, which I think is odd. Like, the book is happening, it should be available. People should be able to buy it now.
Yeah, and what that messes up is review circuits. So there are not reviews in the US and things like that. So, you know, so that kind of is another thing, and that is slightly upsetting about it. So I think at the end of the day, it would be an underdog kind of win, you know. Yeah, go ahead. You tell me what you think.
I liked it. I think that you're absolutely right, that it's heavy-handed, that there is a kind of heavy-handedness about the, not the writing, actually. No. You know, I think that, yes, about the topic. The writing is beautiful in the way that certain kind of historical fiction can be, where you essentially unearth, excavate a world, and you stick the reader into it. I love that about it. There's a kind of just 3D feel about the way she represents Tiger Bay. And you know, the story is, of course, about a man called Mahmoud Matan, a Somali sailor who was wrongfully accused for killing a shopkeeper, a white woman, and he was hanged for it. But something that struck me is the way that she uses our perspective on systemic racism to inform Matan's life and the miscarriage of justice that happens, right? And there's something anachronistic about it, but I thought it's brilliant, right? She essentially layers on 2020 on 1952. And so you can really see what exactly went wrong with Matan's court case, right? Is that it was pure systemic, you know,
they didn't even care. Yeah.
You know, and so in some ways, it's very much relevant to our day and the conversations that we are having about race and Black male bodies and violence. You know, that I thought is fantastic. You know, that kind of historical work that can just give you a perspective on the current moment. Her work does it beautifully.
Yeah, I agree. That's absolutely correct. And I think, you know, the other thing I would quickly add is that I know we all study or work within the kind of broad continental framework of African literature, but I really want a win for East Africa. I want more wins for East Africa. Yes. I love that Abdul Razak Garna won the prize. And one of the things I love about it is that this writing is very, very much from a Muslim perspective.
Yes. Oh,
Gurna's writing. And even though I wouldn't say that's how Natifa is constructing this particular novel, I know she comes out of that. Or, you know, we know that she comes out. Black Mamba Boy certainly comes out of that particular perspective. And I know we talk about diversity and we always end up in race, but I think like Islamic you know, writers who are writing within a kind of certain Islamic framework or Muslim frameworks or about Muslim lives, are often not getting their time in the sun, and it was great that Gurna did, though of course that's not what the Nobel said they were doing. They were doing something else. They were thinking about something else. But for me, that's the inadvertent profit of that. You know, that's we should profit from. So I would like that as well in this case. You know, I was right. I accurately predicted. Of course, I don't know. I was not on social media. Marlon James's win, but I had done a panel with him on the history of 7 killings, and him and Nadifa actually at the Brooklyn Book Festival. And I was like, and then as soon as it was longlisted, I was like, he's going to win it, and he did. But my prediction last year didn't.
So who do you, based on, you know, Bhakti's crystal ball of, you know, Booker Prize crystal ball, who Bhakti is going to win?
I just think my psychic powers are diminished because Nadifa is a friend and I want so much for this to happen. So I think that she has a very, very high chance. But I think it might be Damon Galgut.
You think it might be Galgut? I think my my psychic powers is telling me that it's going to be Shipstead.
They love the fat book.
Yeah, I also I mean I want Nadifa to win, you know, just because I think it'll be a nice cap of an extraordinary year for African literature. Like I would literally lose, you know, just from pure joy if she wins. But I have this sense that that the Booker might go for this kind of very very big book American story that has a mix of everything in it, you know, like drama, fun, but also feminism, a kind of historical depiction of a moment, you know, so I don't know, in a certain kind of Western narrative of itself.
All eyes on Chigozie.
I know. Like Chigozie, don't fall our hand.
Right?
You know,
exactly.
Yeah. But we know it's more complicated than that, of course.
Yeah. Well, either way, it was fun to read them, you know.
It was,
and the Great Circle, I'm going to finish.
I'm definitely going to finish that. Yeah, and I mean, thank you for initiating this, because I got to sit down and read the shortlist, which, you know, I typically don't do. Like this time of the year, I am so busy, but it's so fun, and I think that, you know, next year we should do it again.
Make it a tradition.
We should totally make it a tradition.